It was the inventor Thomas Edison that said genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Accordingly, a genius is often merely a talented person who has done all of his or her homework. In this video, we're going to state basic vocabulary of business organization, as well as compute financial responsibilities of business ownership based on ratios and percentages. All to answer the question, how do business start? Before we jump in, let's make sure we have the skills necessary for this lesson. And to do that, we're going to create and solve an equation that models the following relationship in terms of x. Find two consecutive integers such that the sum of 3 times the first and twice the second is 27. Two consecutive integers can be represented by x and x plus 1. 3 times the first would be 3x, and means plus, twice, and twice the second means 2 times the entire of x plus 1. Is means equals, and then we get 27. So the first thing is to distribute those parentheses, so we get 3x plus 2x plus 2 is 27. Combine like terms to 5x plus 2 is 27. Subtracting 2 from both sides, giving us 5x is 25, meaning x is 5. But remember, the question asked for two consecutive terms, meaning we need both 5 and 6 to be the answers. Now, 3 partners are investing a total of $900,000 to open a garden and landscaping store. Their investments are in the ratio 2, 3, 5, which does the partner that invested the least contribute? Well, if there are 2 parts and 3 parts and 5 parts, then there's a total of 10 parts. A total of $900,000 being divided evenly between all 10 parts would leave $90,000 per part. The partner that contributed the least did 2 parts, or 2 times 90,000, meaning $180,000. Let's state the basic vocabulary of business organization. The money used to start or expand a business is called capital. If a business has only one owner, then it is a sole proprietorship. The money that is left after all of the expenses are paid, including salaries to the owner, is profit. Now, the owner of a sole proprietorship is entitled to all of the profits. However, the owner is responsible or personally liable for any losses that the company would have. Meaning, if the business does not make a profit, the owner must pay all the bills out of their own pocket. A business that is owned by a group of people is called a partnership. A corporation is a business organization that can be owned by one person or a group of people. Each owner who invests money into the corporation receives shares of stock in that corporation. These owners are called shareholders. Stock certificates are used as proof of ownership. Unlike a sole proprietorship and a partnership, the shareholders in the corporation have a limited liability. Each cannot lose more than the value of his or her share in the business. When all shares are owned by just a few individuals and are not available to the public, then the corporation is a private corporation, also known as privately held. When anyone can purchase stock in a corporation, the corporation is called a public corporation. When a business is owned by more than one person, the owners do not necessarily own equivalent or equal portions of the business. Ratios and percentages can be used to represent the financial responsibility of the owners or partners. So let's take a look at an example. Michelle invests $15,000 in a partnership that has 4 other partners. The total investment of all partners is $240,000. What percentage of the business does Michelle own? We're going to represent Michelle's investment as a fraction of the total investment and convert that fraction to a decimal. Then write it as a percentage. We're going to use the fraction of Michelle's investment over the total investment. Michelle invested $15,000. The total investment into the company was $240,000. This means that $15,000 divided by $240,000 will give us 0.0625. Now, to convert that to a percentage, we're simply going to multiply by 100 and get 6.25%. So Michelle owns 6.25% of the partnership. Let's check and make sure that we actually understand all this. Kyle invests $20,000 in a partnership that has 5 other partners. The total investment of the partners is $160,000. What percentage of the business is owned by the 5 other partners? We're going to start by setting up the fraction, which is Kyle's investment over the total investment. This would be $20,000 over $160,000. This means that Kyle has 0.125 or 12.5% of the business. Now that's what Kyle owns. So we have to subtract that from 100% of the business, meaning the other 5 partners have 87.5% of the business. Now let's compute the financial responsibility of business ownership based on that percentage. Here, the total number of shares of stock in Bulls Corp is 650,000. Mike owns 12% of the shares. How many shares of Bulls Corp stock does he own? So 12% is equal to 12 over 100. Knowing that that is 12 over 100, which is what is owned, we want to know how many of the 650,000 that would be. If we multiply both sides by 650,000, this is going to give us 12 over 100 times 650,000. That would leave 78,000 shares. So Mike owns 78,000 shares of Bulls Corp. Let's check and make sure we understand this. So Jillian owns 60% of stocks in a private catering corporation. There are 1,200 shares of the entire corporation. How many shares does Jillian own? We know that 60% is 60 over 100. So 60 over 100 would be equal to some number of shares for Jillian over the 1,200. Multiply both sides of the equation by 1,200 and we get 720 shares. Let's compute some financial responsibilities of business ownership based on ratios now. 3 partners are investing a total of $900,000 to open a garden and landscaping store. Their investments are in the ratio of 2 to 3 to 5. How much does the partner that invested the least contribute? The first contributed 2 times, which represents the first investor, which is also going to be the least. The second invested 3 times, which would be represented by 3x. The third invested 5 times, which we can represent by 5x. This can be represented as an equation. 2x plus 3x plus 5x is $900,000. Combining like terms, we're going to get 10x is equal to 900,000. Divide both sides by 10 and we get 90,000. Now, that 90,000 is a representation of x, not how much the partner that invested the least did. The partner that invested the least invested 2x, which is 2 times 90,000, or $180,000. Let's check and make sure that we understand how to do this by looking at 2 partners are starting a wedding planning business. The total investment is $45,000. Their investments are at a ratio of 4 to 5. How much does each investor contribute? The first investor has 4 parts, which we're going to represent by 4x. The second investor has 5 parts, which we're going to represent by 5x. This means that 4 parts and 5 parts make up the whole, which has a value of $45,000. Combining like terms, we're going to get 9x is equal to $45,000. So if we divide both sides by 9, then we get $5,000 is the value of x. This means that the first investor invested $20,000 and the second investor invested $25,000. Let's extend our understanding of that just a little bit more by looking at 2 partners that each invest 35% in a startup business. They need to find another investor for the rest of the money. What percentage of the business will that person own, and what is the ratio to represent the investment in the business? Let's take a look at the first question, which is what percentage of the business will that person own? If the first person has 35% and the second person has 35%, we know that all of it must add up to 100. So 35 plus 35 plus x would equal to 100, meaning that 70 plus x is 100 or that X is 30%. So that third person would own 30% of the business. Now we need to tackle the second problem, which is to write a ratio that represents the investment in the business. We're going to set our ratio up as the first person, second person, third person. And the first person has 35% of the business, the second person has 35% of the business, and the third person 30% of the business. Now the thing that can be noticed is 35, 35, and 30 all have a number in common, 5. We can divide all of them by 5, giving us 35 divided by 5 is 7, 35 divided by 5 is still 7, and 30 divided by 5 is 6. So our ratio is 776.